All right, let's talk about the endocrine system. The endocrine system controls and coordinates functions of the cells and organs throughout our body. We know it because it's made up of glands, and the glands secrete hormones, which are chemical agents that they then secrete into the bloodstream or into lymph. That way, hormones can circulate through the whole body. The way that these chemicals work is they are secreted and they look for specific receptors on cells that need to alter function. And then they do that on that cell, that function. So the cell is actually the one that does the reaction. The hormone is just a messenger. And the receptor on the cell is what triggers that reaction when that receptor is full. Exocrine glands don't secrete their substances into the bloodstream. They secrete their substances directly via ducts to the external body surface, as well as the internal body surfaces that are connected to the outside, such as the intestinal system, the gut tube. The endocrine system is very closely related to the nervous system. By that, it is controlling and coordinating what the body does. But it doesn't do that as fast as the nervous system, but it is much more lasting than a nervous system effect. This is very important because we have many processes that are slower and ongoing, such as growth and reproduction, or also balancing metabolic processes, for example. And that's where the hormones are very, very useful, where the nerves are just not long acting enough. They are more reactionary. This system adapts then our body to a constantly changing environment, to stresses, and so it constantly adjusts what's going on. Glucose is too high in the bloodstream, glucose is too low, viscosity is different, calcium levels, etc. Those are all things that the hormonal system controls. The endocrine system, I should say. The chemical molecules, the hormones, bind to specific receptors on the target, which then alter their activity. So we just said that before. So the hormone is a messenger, the chemical, and the target cell is the one that has a reaction, that creates a change in the activity. Sensitivity of a cell to a hormone depends very largely on the number of receptors that are available. This is very important. When we have not enough receptor on a cell membrane, then that hormone is not acting as strongly. When we have more receptors, there's more availability for that hormone to act more stronger. Biochemically, when we look at these hormones, we divide them into a lipophilic, which is an affinity to fat, or a hydrophilic, which is affinity to water hormone. The hydrophilic hormones will have to bind on the receptor on the surface of the cell membrane because they cannot penetrate that oil film that the phospholipid bilayer creates. So then on the surface they start, and then that often starts a chain reaction that goes into the cell, crosses the cell membrane, and triggers a secondary messenger system inside the cell that then changes and influences the cell activity. Very often it influences the transport or enzyme system. Lipophilic hormones can go through the cell membrane, and inside the cell membrane then, in the cytoplasm, they bind to a receptor. And the hormone receptor then migrates often to the nucleus and activates a gene that initiates a protein synthesis or something like that. Hormones are secreted by many cells in the body. We have both classic endocrine glands, and those are exclusively concerned with hormone secretion, but we also have body tissue that does many other functions, such as muscle tissue or adipose tissue, but they also have glandular functions. They also secrete hormones. For example, the example I bring in brought in class before, is when we move and do sport, the muscle becomes a gland and secretes myokines that do all kind of stuff in the body that's generally understood as positive and helping the body cope with sugar balances or blood pressure. I think blood pressure also it acts on, but I also know that the myokines act in the brain, and they help create more hippocampal cells, which helps create more memory, but also makes us less reactive because the hippocampal cells help the amygdala calm down a little bit. So back to the glands. Originally, the classic endocrine glands are the ones we study, but we need to be aware that many body tissues also act as glands secondarily to their primary function. Hormone secretion is largely regulated via negative feedback mechanisms. And those balance blood levels of many things such as calcium, glucose, and so forth. So that means if the calcium in the body is too low, we have a hormone that goes to the bone and brings more calcium from the bone into the bloodstream and raises it back up to its levels where they need to be. So that's the negative, right? It's reversing the trend. It's not making it worse. We talked about that in the first chapter. Many receptors that measure things are located in the hypothalamus, in the central nervous system, the brain. And the hypothalamus then sends hormones to the pituitary gland, which sits right underneath it, really. And then that in turn influences many peripheral glands and tissues directly. So often we have the hypothalamus sends a message to the pituitary gland, and then the pituitary gland secretes a hormone that goes, let's say, to a thyroid gland, and then the thyroid gland secretes the actual hormone that acts on the body. So these are multi-step processes, and we need that in order to keep it from working out of order. But this situation here, this system gives the central nervous system an overriding organizational control over the entire endocrine system. And we remember the hypothalamus is the connection between the brain and the body. We have often emotions in the brain. We are angry, we are frustrated, we are sad, we are happy. And the hypothalamus links those emotions to the body itself. And that's also then where the key lies between psychosomatic pathology or illness and the brain connection.